Welcome to UFO Classified.
So my skeptical mind, and that's just who I am, my skeptical mind goes to, well, yeah, of course, you've got this guy over here that's logical and reasonable, and you got this guy over here that's wearing a tinfoil hat. Of course the tinfoil hat guy's going to see a lot of stuff, right? He's like imagining it, or he's watched one too many sci-fi movies.
But it can be used to help us frame hypotheses for UFO propulsion, power, stealth, weaponry.
Everything that we experience is very positive.
Sometimes the field of ufology has a short memory span.
We didn't know anything about the $22 million back then. We just kind of thought, well, this is, and I think that was the reason why they were looking for military-type people, because in the military, you work with whatever you got, no matter what the situation is, and you just kind of adapt and overcome.
Oh, good afternoon. Happy Friday. It always just makes me smile to be here and hang out with my people and to talk about fun and sometimes frightening things and things that should concern all of us. But for the next 2 weeks, I am going to have a good time because we have now entered my favorite time of year. I live for Halloween, and every Halloween since I was 16 years old, I had a huge party, invited my friends. In fact, I remember one year I was dressed up like a naughty cop, and there were so many people there that the cops actually came, and of course I thought they were in costume, but that's okay. It was a good time. I finally figured that out. Needless to say, they had a great time at the party. So it's one of those things, but with all the stress and strife that we're facing in the world right now, it's fun to just focus on something other than doom and gloom, which I know I have been focusing on some dark areas with regard to Skinwalker Ranch, but tonight we're going to have fun. And I couldn't think of a better person to bring on my show than my dear friend and colleague, Nick Redfern, because he knows everything creepy on the planet. In fact, I thought of Halloween and I thought, yeah, I got to have Nick. So Nick, welcome to the show.
Hey, Erica. How's it going?
Well, you know what? It's better now that the show has started, and I get to hang out with all my friends and talk about creepy stories and things. And what's going on in your world?
Oh, well, actually, it's the right time of the year, I guess, because the temperature's plummeting here, and it's already dark skies, so it's already in the right atmosphere, even. So.
I love it. And I'd ask you what you're going to do for Halloween, but I think both of our Halloweens are so drastically different this year than they ever have been, but...
Well, probably I won't be doing much at all. It's... I guess, with the virus and everything, really, I'm actually sort of hoping people don't come knocking on the doors in numbers,
No, I think it'll be interesting, definitely, and I hope I'm going to dress up. Party for one. What else is new? But it's just such a great time of year because it's, we, especially in Utah, we love Halloween, and you can drive around the streets and see the beautiful leaves that have fallen and see all the wonderful decorations that people have put out. And it really is, it's one of those nights. And I think I've always loved it because you can be whoever you want to be. And, if you want to be sexy, you can be sexy. If you want to be creepy, you can be creepy. And it just reminds me of childhood and all those great possibilities and things. And so when is the last time you dressed up?
Oh, wow. I'd say 8 or 9, something like that.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Nothing since then. I don't think. I mean, everybody celebrates Halloween in the UK every year, but it's more sort of like a get-together, like a party kind of thing, rather than costumes and whatever. It's sort of just, everybody sort of sets up a bonfire going, and there's fireworks, and, just have a good time. And I was kind of thinking, with the whole situation with the virus right now, you might actually find that a lot of families, it'll be more fun because it'll be more sort of intimate inside, where you could have, parents and the kids and, maybe sort of play games and things like that, spooky games. And it would be different, to previous years, obviously, but it'd be kind of like a cool sort of intimate way of doing it, inside and all sort of sitting around together playing games and whatever. So.
What game would you play? On the spot.
Yeah.
Would you play Operation?
Yeah, that'd be a good one. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot like that, those that make your teeth grind, those games. I remember those when I was a kid. There was like, did you have Kerplunk over here?
This sounds familiar, but I obviously was not a Kerplunker.
Maybe it was a different name. I'll tell you what it was. It was like a big, long, wide tube, and you'd put like these straws in and then marbles on top, and you have to pull the sticks out one by one, and the one who gets to keep as many marbles as possible. It's not the greatest game.
Sounds like the game of ufology.
Yeah, and maybe frustration, something like that.
Huh. When I was growing up and playing games, I mean, I loved like Trivial Pursuit and Cranium and, just stuff like that. But and the Ouija board.
Oh, cool.
Which I hate to say because, when you're young and you don't really think that this is, something maybe more serious. You typically kind of, play with Ouija boards. And I remember my grandmother, when I was maybe 8 or 9, she took me into the toy store. And, Grandma, I want a Ouija board. And she's, we were going to get one. And then she read the back and, beware, da, 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 da. And she put it back and looked like it was going to light on fire at any moment. And so I was really, I didn't get the Ouija board. I was very sad. But then later in my life, in my early 20s, we bought a haunted house. And that house first of all, it was so much fun to have Halloween parties in, but it was in a really old area and it was next to a polygamous compound. And all 3 of the houses reportedly had different types of hauntings that were going on. And in our case, we used to see an entity, a man, that would be standing on the kitchen counter or standing, leaning against the kitchen counter or looking in the backyard. And it was a really interesting place for sure, but definitely taught me a lot. And at the very end, I was very sad to leave because it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Yeah. So, so go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think, it's one of those times of the year that everybody loves it, and likes to have a good time because everybody likes spooky stories, and so it's sort of perfect time, and and it doesn't matter how aged you are either. It just sort of it's like Christmas. It's sort of just a good fun time when everybody's sort of hanging out and whatever. But yeah, it's sort of cool to sort of just pull out a bunch of old cardboard boxes with some 20-year-old games and whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is kind of fun. I totally love it, and I don't know. I mean, I'll never stop jumping out from behind corners. And, I'm such a special treat. In fact, I'm going to play some of my little spooking around my house because I love to scare my family members and my friends and different things. And it's just, I don't know why. I'm like a 10-year-old boy when it comes to those things, but I've got all my different masks, and it doesn't matter what time of year. If I give somebody a good fright, then I'm game.
Well, you always should put some cool horror movie on, music on as well.
Absolutely. So let's talk about horror movies, because I know you and I talk about this all the time, and we've got our favorite horror movies of all time. But if you could name like your top 3 scary movies, what would they be?
Well, one of them for sure would be Night of the Demon. Well, Night of the Demon was the English title, but the American title is Curse of the Demon, and it's like a moody old black and white movie from the 50s, and it's all to do with like devil worship, and that's a really cool movie, Curse of the Demon. And I think there's another movie called Curse of the Demon, but this, if you look up Curse the Demon in 1957. And it's a really cool one. That's sort of part of it set at Stonehenge, and then at this creepy old house, and so it's sort of it's like the perfect thing, for Halloween. That would be one, and another one. It's sort of kind of a lesser known one, but it is a creepy one as well. It's an early 1970s made-for-TV movie. It's a US one, and it's called Don't Be Afraid of the Dark. And again, it's set in like this creepy big old house. And without going into the story too much and spoiling it, but there's these sort of strange little humanoid creatures that sort of hide in the walls and the air vents and the cellars, and this couple move in and don't realise what's going on.
That's never good.
Yeah, that is a good no, but it is a good film. And the other one I would probably pick The Ninth Gate with Johnny Depp. That's one of my favourite movies.
And with that, that has, obviously it's kind of based on the occult, but explain a little bit about it.
Well, what it is, in the movie, Johnny Depp's character, he's a book dealer, and there's this millionaire guy who collects books on the devil, and these ancient books, etc. And he hires Johnny Depp to try and find this ancient book, which supposedly you can use to summon up the devil. And he has to go from the US across Europe to try and find the book. So it's kind of like a cross between an occult movie versus a detective kind of situation, but he's a detective looking for the book. And it's an ancient book, like 500-600 years old, and it's sort of really sort of cool, atmospheric book and movie, and yeah, that's my sort of three, that I think that I would go for. But if you want music, the best thing is to probably play some of the Misfits, because nearly all of their songs, are sort of perfect. You sing-along punk, and it's all sort of, about vampires, Frankenstein's monster, skeletons.
I'd have joined that band. Yeah, I love everything that goes with this. In fact, I watched The Pit and the Pendulum the other night, and I'd forgotten how much I loved Vincent Price, and how I remember seeing that interestingly enough, when I was in grade school for whatever, we'd have like a big day, we'd go in the auditorium and they would play us like a creepy movie, which, I really honestly can't believe they played The Pit and the Pendulum when we were, 5, 6, 7 years old, but hey, they did. But I did revisit that, and I really loved that. And I also loved Candyman. And I want to watch that again. I always thought that was really clever, and I love the acting, and of course there's The Exorcist, which will always be high on my list, and The Omen, and Rosemary's Baby, and The Changeling, and there's just so many great movies. In fact, and two I watched, because I've been, clearly with COVID, it's like you got a lot of time on your hands these days, and so I've been watching some of my old favorite movies, and there was one with Cary Grant that is one of his first movies that he did. It's called Arsenic and Old Lace. And that was very creepy. It's about his two aunts who are a little kooky, and they end up they're serial killers. But it's just you should watch it. You'd really like it.
Oh, okay. No, I've not heard of that one, I don't think.
Yeah, I love that. And there's one more. I just have to. Oh my gosh, why can't I remember? It's Jack Lemmon, Kim Novak, Bell Book and Candle. And that was a movie done back in the 60s, and Kim Novak and Jack Lemmon are witches, but they've got this little beatnik thing going on, and Jack, they're in New York, and they go to these really cool nightclubs, and they have to lift a lid off to go in the sewer system, and then they get into these cool nightclubs, and it's really, really cool, and I love the music and that whole time period, so... Thanks for letting me tell you all of my things. And then, Peter in chat is saying, what about Incubus starring Bill Shatner? And I guess I need to watch that again. I don't remember that. Do you remember that movie?
No.
Huh. Hopefully it was when Shatner was looking, good back in the 60s. Oh, well. Yeah, no. But Nick, you've, in your career, I mean, your career is based around things that are paranormal, and creepy and perplexing. And so I'm sitting here with the book Paranormal Parasites, the Voracious Appetites of Soul-Sucking Supernatural Entities that you wrote. And so, yeah. And I don't know how you keep them all straight, but talk a little bit about this book and some of the things inside.
Well, I guess this is like a very kind of relevant one for Halloween, because it deals with multiple different types of sort of supernatural, dangerous creatures. And, I mean, there's plenty of them, to choose from. But I guess for Halloween, one of the creepiest of all would be the black-eyed children phenomenon, which the book itself, Paranormal Parasites, actually has a picture on the cover of a couple of kids, creepy kids with these solid black eyes. And there's a lot of sort of debate as to what the black-eyed children actually are. Now, unlike most sort of paranormal phenomena that's out there, whether it's Bigfoot, UFOs, ghosts, they've been around a long, long time, But when it comes to the black-eyed children phenomenon, that actually was unknown until almost to the start of the 21st century. We're talking about the first encounters and reports surfaced around about the end of the 1990s, thereabouts. And basically they're called the black-eyed children because that's what they are. They're sort of kids with these solid, huge black eyes. And typically they're described as having very pale skin. They wear these black hoodies, which I've actually got on right now.
Well, no, there's a shocker. Nick in a black hoodie. My. Time for the second coming.
Yes. And they knock on people's doors and try and find ways into the home. And the whole phenomenon is very weird and creepy. And most people describe, the black-eyed children sort of knocking on the door late at night, sort of, usually after about 8, 9, 10 o'clock, something like that. And, of course, most people, you don't sort of get like a huge banging on the door, at 10 o'clock at night. And if you do, you're thinking, well, who the hell's that? But people, when they look through the little spy hole through the front door, and they see these creepy kids staring at them, most of us, you would not open the door to them. And
well,
the weird thing, you're right. But the weird thing is that a lot of people said they felt compelled to go to the door, and even more compelled to open it. It was almost like a mind control or a hypnotism in play. And but the weird thing is, the most significant is that they won't enter your home until they're invited inside. And that's very much like the old legends of vampires, that they can't cross the so-called threshold, until you give them permission. And they find multiple ways to try and get into the house. They'll say, we're lost, can we come and use the phone? Or we're homeless, could you give us some food? But, they always try and ensure that they can come in rather than you come outside. And one of the strange things is that they all seem to be of one specific age, and we're talking about, usually they're sort of round about 10 to about 13, but of all the reports I've got, I've never got any reports where the kids are like 6 or 7, and I've got none where they were like 15 or 16. It's always round about, sort of 8, 9, 10, 11, and that's about it. So, they're sort of, very young kids. And when people have let them in the house, the main thing that they've talked about is like a lack of memory. Maybe a period of about 10 minutes is just blanked out of their mind, and they just cannot get it back, and they're not sure what happened within that 10-minute or so period. But the one thing that we do know, and this may sort of relate to what happened to them, is that after the encounter, and very often they cannot remember if they spoke to them or anything, but the interesting thing is that after the experiences, almost all of the people who actually encountered them and when the kids came in the house was that the people afterwards felt extremely weak and tired and crashing, like a diabetic might crash, that kind of thing, and almost as if, they were literally being drained of their life force. And that's why, I thought that was a perfect, example for the cover of the book, because, when you've got something like the Black-Eyed Children, where they're possibly, literally draining of us our energy because they then feed upon it, and so everything's very strange about the Black-Eyed Children, and I mean, for Halloween as well, it's perfect time for the real black-eyed kids to come out, roaming the streets, with their hoodies, and people might actually think they're just real kids, dressed up, when maybe they're infiltrating us on Halloween. Who knows?
Lord have mercy. So, are there black-eyed kids cases in combination with MIBs?
Well, that's a good question. One of the interesting things about that question is the approach they take is exactly the same, because a lot of the Black-Eyed Children cases, as I said, they have to be invited in. The Men in Black, a lot of them, the witnesses have said that after they've had like a UFO encounter, and perhaps the night after the Men in Black turn up, they wait on the doorstep until they're invited in. Now, sometimes, they come in without the invite, but there are cases when the Men in Black and the lesser-known Women in Black as well, they've actually sort of asked to come in as well. And sometimes there's also this sense of hypnosis and mind control as well in relation to the Men in Black. The real Men in Black are nothing like, Tommy Lee Jones and Will Smith. That's just Hollywood's version. The real Men in Black, their skin is extremely pale, like a sheet of paper. They look kind of gaunt and ill, and they have these bulging eyes, and the Black-Eyed Children have extremely pale skin as well. So in that sense, there is a parallel because both phenomena kind of mirror each other. But the interesting thing is, I've never come across a Black-Eyed Children case that has a UFO angle attached to it. But there are those other parallels. So there are some issues that are still mysteries to us, really. So.
How interesting. And so are there any photos of Black-Eyed Children?
No, there aren't. And I think the main reason why is because of that issue of like the mind control and the hypnotism. If it was like they were just at the doorstep and you knew about the Black-Eyed Children legends, you might just grab your phone and take a picture. But nobody does that, and I think it's because that mind control prevents them from doing what they would have normally done. And a lot of the witnesses said, when the kids had gone, it was kind of like coming out of surgery. If you had you've had an operation, and there's sort of like a 15, 20-minute period, when you're still in this sort of situation where you're not really sure you were and what's going on, and then it slowly comes back to you bit by bit, and that's how a lot of people feel, but it's almost like an orchestrated version of that. So I think that's why there are no pictures, because they kind of the ones pulling the strings, and they're also the ones who are able to control your mind versus what you would normally would have done. But there's no doubt that there are similarities between the black-eyed children, women in black, men in black, and also the phenomenon of what's called the Hatman and the shadow people, which again are kind of similar things that invade our bedrooms and homes, late at night, that kind of thing.
And the Hatman is something that has always fascinated me, because I've talked with people who have had that experience, of seeing a large figure in their room in the middle of the night with a very prominent hat and things, and whether that's, just imagination, or whether they're a trick of the mind or something like that, or whether there was, the people that I've talked to have definitely felt a sense of panic and dread when they recount their stories.
Well, yeah, I'll come back to the panic issue in a minute, because that's an important one. But yeah, the Hatman is called the Hatman for a good reason, because he wears a hat.
No.
And typically the hat is a fedora, and that's what most of the men in black wear as well. They also wear a black fedora. That's like another example as to why they're so different to Hollywood's versions of the Men in Black. But with the Hatman, they're more like shadowy. The Men in Black, they're sort of whatever they are. They're flesh and blood in some form at least. The Hatman is more like a shadowy figure that you will see in your room, and this crosses over with the shadow people. And imagine like a shadow, like a person, but just being a shadow. Kind of like if you're looking in your living room, and then you suddenly see like a shadow going across the wall with a fedora hat on. That's the kind of thing that people report. It's very much shadowy rather than solid substance. But the phenomenon itself is an intriguing one, because most of the encounters occur in bedrooms, and it's usually where people are in a state of what's known as sleep paralysis. And I think most people at some point, have experienced sleep paralysis. I've had it, I think, twice or possibly 3 times in my entire life. And the typical scenario is that you're lying in bed asleep, and then you kind of semi-awake, and you have this feeling of dread that either there's some sort of supernatural entity in the room, or something's coming up the stairs, or if you're on a 1-floor building, it's coming along the corridor, that kind of thing. And the more and more closer they get, the harder and harder it is for you to break out of the spell, so to speak. And it really is like a sense of paralysis, and people's heart rates sort of just elevate, and it's a very sort of stressful situation. Some people talk about seeing something like a hooded werewolf. That's actually quite I won't say popular, but it's one that gets reported a lot. And also you have these stories go back actually thousands of years, to the early years of civilization, when they were known as like the incubus and the succubus, and this sort of demonic, beautiful woman named Lilith, who would break into people's homes and terrorize them in that situation. And so, you can go back a long, long time with these entities, and the panic aspect of all this is a very important part, because again, after these experiences and the being or the creature, whatever you want to call it, when it's gone, then the paralysis breaks. But a lot of people feel totally wiped out. They're like cold sweat, no energy, and just a feeling that they've been just drained, and again, that's very similar to the black-eyed children. So that's why I called the book Paranormal Parasites, because I think these things really do feed upon us, but they don't come knocking on the door and say, hey, can you get me a McDonald's or something? We're talking about, these things feeding upon energy, and the stronger they get, the weaker we get. And you can find throughout history multiple different types of paranormal entities that will feed on people. For example, in India and China, they have what's called the hungry ghost. And again, that's sort of a similar situation. And, you can just go, as I said, you just go throughout history. And those are sort of the primary ones. But as I said, with the black-eyed children, the big difference is that it was the latter part of the 1990s when this really kicked off. And, why they suddenly popped up then, that's an intriguing question, which unfortunately I don't have an answer. I wish I did. But for some reason, they just popped up out of nowhere. And it was really up to probably around about 2011, 2012, when the whole phenomenon really kind of took off and it hit the net, and a couple of movies were made, a couple of documentaries, and it went from there. And for people who want to know more about the black-eyed children, a good friend of mine, David Weatherly, he's written sort of the definitive book on that subject, and it covers just about every theory, every case, and just about everything, in relation to that. That's if you want to find out, about that phenomenon, get David's book, because it's a really good one at any time, best of time, but for Halloween, it's the perfect one, I guess.
I know that it is. It's always so fascinating, and I wonder if any of the black-eyed children live close to any military installations.
You never know.
Oh, you never know what's going on. It's funny because we're talking about Men in Black, and there have been. As time goes on, we find out more about, people that were actually in the intelligence agencies or in the military that were playing Men in Black. That was their shtick. And I know that Bigelow allegedly had a particular person that he paid to be a Man in Black and to go kind of kind of dazzle people that had photos and videos of specific things, and he'd either play off that he was a Man in Black, or he'd intimidate them and then get the videos and photos, and so I think there's lots going on. And as with all of the paranormal stuff, there could be on the back burner some sort of human element involved, which is probably what they bank on.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's interesting, you bring up the human angle of the whole MIB phenomenon, because it gets kind of, I won't say sort of baffling, but it is a little bit weird, because there seems to be two different types of Men in Black. Now, there are a number of cases where, people have seen a UFO and somebody's knocked on the door, the night after, and there's just a guy in a black suit, or just a regular guy, black suit, white shirt, black tie, and wants to come inside and essentially threatens the person not to talk about that UFO experience they had the night before or the night before that. And typically, they'll quickly show some ID, and even if it's it looks like a genuine military or government ID card, if the person then goes to try and find the person or track them down, they cannot find the name, or they cannot find of anybody who worked at the local base, etc., etc. So you've got one category of Men in Black, which are clearly normal people, and which are obviously working from some sort of agency or think tank or something like that. But then you've got this weirder aspect, as I mentioned earlier, the creepy, pale ones, gaunt, and their skin kind of looks like plastic, and they sort of talk in a really weird, almost like a droning way, as if they're not really sure what they're saying. It's almost like they're doing it parrot fashion, And so what I think has happened is that there's the original, when the Men in Black mystery began in the early 1950s, we can make a good case that the really weird MIB were on the scene first, and they were the ones that were threatening people in the early days. But then I think what happened was that government agencies realized that if they wanted to silence people as well, they could. I think they decided, hey, why don't we dress up like these MIB as well if we want to silence people and threaten them? And so, in other words, you've got two groups. And for the military group, it doesn't really matter to them, I don't think, if it's this group or that group, because everything gets hidden behind a sort of a mirror, if you like, of Men in Black. But there's no doubt that there's two different categories: one human, one, I don't know, demonic, paranormal, extraterrestrial. I don't know, but they're not regular people. Put it that way.
Well, and it is interesting how some of the technologies that we've invented are invented to mimic the paranormal and things, and so there might be that sort of relationship with things. But it is interesting to know all the history about all of it and listen to the stories, and then, like you say, go back historically and look at some of the older cases and talking about the incubus and succubus and different beliefs or experiences that we've had throughout time.
Oh yeah, and I mean, the names changes, over time, like the incubus, succubus, Lilith, and there's a famous one in Newfoundland that's known as the Old Hag. And one of the reasons why I don't believe this is just some sort of internal nightmare situation, most of these cases are extremely similar, but with the Old Hag in Newfoundland, that has a gigantic number of reports, but outside of Newfoundland, they're not there. It's just like regular numbers. So, I think that for me at least, that demonstrates that, we are looking at a situation where something gets into our brains, our minds, when we're at our most vulnerable. And our most vulnerable is when we're sleeping. And I think that has a lot to do with it as well. These things probably wouldn't get away with sort of draining of our energy during the day, when you're at work or whatever. But when you're vulnerable, you're fast asleep, that's the time when, the attack occurs. And the one I had was, the main one I had, was with one of these, almost like a dog head, a wolf head, but in like a cloak with a hood. And it was coming down the corridor at the time. Me and my ex-wife, we were living in a duplex. And so there was like a long corridor between the two parts of the building. And it probably went on for about 9 or 10 seconds that I could see this thing coming down the corridor. And it was making noises, but it was weird. It was like a language. And by that, I mean, it sounded like growls, but it didn't sound like a wild animal. It was almost like the growling was some sort of language. Obviously, I couldn't understand it, but it came across like a language, if that makes sense. And the closer it got to the bedroom, it got sort of stronger and stronger. And then I managed to break away from it, and then it was gone. And then I had another experience about 2 weeks later, and then we did this like a cleansing in the duplex. With sage and various other things, and it went away. Thank goodness. But that, I mean, everybody I think finds those sleep paralysis situations extremely traumatic because you have no control over it whatsoever.
Exactly. Yeah, I've had a couple episodes with that in my life, and it's like you can't move, and it is very, very frightening, for sure. And so, what was there anything particular that you were working on when you had that happen to you?
Not at that time, no. But there are people who have been researching into things like the black-eyed children and Men in Black, and they start to experience weird things like unusual and weird phone calls in the night. People pick the phone up at 3 a.m. because they're worried. The phone's ringing out, and so people run to the phone, or just lean over from the bed and get your phone. It's bad news. It's got to be bad news because it's 4 a.m., But people, when they do answer the phone, it's sort of weird screeching and like metallic noises, and, it really sort of creeps people out. When you said about what I was doing at the same time, for me at least, there wasn't a connection there. But with some people, when they're dealing with the occult and the paranormal, they do find that strange things start to happen. For example, there's some cases of the Men in Black, the weirder group, the other group, entering people's home, and after they've left, there's been like significant poltergeist activity, sort of items in the house sort of flying off tables and things like that. It's almost as if some kind of residual energy has been left behind. And but there have been cases, where I have been digging into things, and there has been sort of like a backlash situation, and that was, in some cases, that was related to when I was investigating things like the shadow people and the jinn and things like that. And most time, sometimes it's like a trickster type situation, where you find yourself in a weird situation where, it's almost like a magical kind of situation, but then sometimes it gets worse and it becomes manipulative, like a spoiled, dangerous child, that's sort of running amok. And then it gets worse, and again, you have to sort of then try and find ways to banish it. I've seen a lot of examples of things like that where people start getting into this because it's cool, and that kind of situation, and then from there it goes a bit manipulative, and these weird experiences, but they're still kind of cool, and then it starts to get sort of darker and bleaker, and things go wrong, and then there's like a huge rash of negativity, in the home, and electronics start to blow out, and it just sort of piles upon, on each other, and that's when you have to intervene, or have someone intervene who can actually know how to deal with that kind of situation.
Well, and that brings us to the next, topic. If when you start dabbling in the occult, or you have some of these experiences, and then things take an ominous turn, let's talk a little bit about spirit possession and exorcism, because after all, this is Halloween, and that is probably one of the creepiest things that we could talk about.
Well, yeah, I mean, ghosts, paranormal stuff, I've done a lot on that, but and I've taken part in, a few ghost investigations, not many, but a few. But one of the things that, and actually this also ties in with the Men in Black, is the issue of possession. Now, the one person who told me about this particular aspect of the Men in Black mystery, and I'd never thought about this before, was Timothy Green Beckley. I'm sure you know Tim, don't you?
Yeah, and actually, I did a chapter in one of his books. Yeah, so yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Well, Tim's a good guy. He's been in the scenes way back in maybe the late 1950s, early 60s, something like that. But he's been around a long, long time, and he's still very active to this day. And like me, Tim has done a lot of research into the Men in Black, and he found a number of cases where Men in Black had turned up on the door and threatened people not to talk about their UFO experiences. And the more Tim looked into this, he felt there was sort of a distinct possibility that the Men in Black were actually regular, normal people who had been placed in a state of possession, and whatever had possessed them and uniting them, was the thing that was sort of pulling the strings. But perhaps like for 2 or 3 hours, something had taken control of their mind and their body and essentially sent them out as the Men in Black to do the work of whatever the key being or entity is. And then afterwards, they would sort of come out of this state of possession, not knowing what they were doing, or why they were in, half a mile across town from, where they should have been. And that's sort of really creepy alternative angle to, possession. The idea that something, is running this MIB program, and they can quite literally, find ways to control you, and dictate your mind, and absolutely nothing about it. All you know is that 3 hours of your life's gone, and in that period,
sounds like they might know Sidney Gottlieb.
Yeah. So, and Tim actually found a number of cases like that, and all really creepy and strange, which it would be, if you suddenly didn't understand why 3 hours had gone, and perhaps you got different clothes on, and it would put you in a state of panic, as if you got, a brain tumor or something going on. But when you look at it like that, the possibility that the Men in Black could be sort of demonically possessed humans doing the will of whatever the creature is. It's sort of a unique and very different angle, but an interesting angle as well.
Absolutely. And so Peter in chat room wanted me to ask you if you'd heard of Gary Sudbrink.
If I'd heard what, sorry?
But a fellow we're talking about, he wants to know about the MIB phone calls, Gary Sudbrink.
Gary, that's the caller.
No, this is the fellow who I guess this is his case, Gary Sudbrink, and it was about MIB phone calls.
Oh, I don't know that name.
Okay.
No.
All right. Well, maybe we need to get Peter on the show because he's been around for a long, long time, and we should have him talk about this case because that sounds absolutely fascinating, Peter. So prepare yourself. You're going to have to come on the show. But I mean, seriously. And so, Ray Boucher, who we've talked about before, because Ray Boucher was the foundation for your book, Final Events. And one of his first areas of interest was MIBs.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And so, do you know much about what he was looking into, or his feelings on the whole subject? Because he is, he's a preacher, and so he has more of a reverend. He's a reverend, so he's got more of a spiritual aspect with regard to these things.
Well, yeah, you're right. I mean, Ray Boucher he's kind of got like a unique background because, as Erica just said, he's a reverend, but he's also deeply involved in ufology. And in the 80s, he ran the Nebraska office of MUFON, and he's run other operations and written extensive papers on the Men in Black and the paranormal and things like this. And Ray sort of very well learned, in a lot of different areas, as you would imagine from his background. And he's also someone who spent extensively amount of time digging into Men in Black stories. And I think in the same way that he takes the UFO subject to be demonic rather than being extraterrestrial, he sort of takes that approach with the Men in Black. He he sort of, his area of interest, I think more than any other, on this angle is the weirder side of it all. These MIB who actually don't look like properly human, they kind of look sick and anorexic and just weird, you just wouldn't want to get too close to them, But, I mean, Ray gave me a really good interview when I interviewed him, I think 2010, I think it was, when my second book on the Men in Black came out, called The Real Men in Black. And he gave me a really good interview about how and why he thought there was this paranormal angle. And also, he sort of, put the idea out there, be careful because, you keep looking into this, they'll bite back. And that's one of the things that, Ray has noticed, that you start getting involved in some of these things and they just turn the tables, and we just don't have the ability to stop that. But yeah, I know that for a fact Ray has got, a huge number, literally huge number of Men in Black reports that he's collected based on, for the most part, his own investigations. And, but he's also someone who's recognized the hazards of all this as well.
He has, and he's had some interesting, stories. He's been on the show before, and you and I have talked to him on my shows as well because of my fascination with the Collins elite and with Ray's story and how he was looking into the Rendlesham case, and then all of a sudden, strange things start happening. People start coming to him with insider information, and it's a trip, and that definitely happens in the world of ufology. But what is your thought at the end of the day on what a man in black is? I know that you've mentioned that you feel that there's something human. There's a human aspect to it, and then there's also this supernatural aspect. Are you thinking it might be more extraterrestrial, or is this something that would be spiritual in nature, or what do you think?
Well, as I said, the ones that are human, look human, they are human. But I think what they've done, they realized at some point, probably in the 50s or the very latest in the early 1960s, I think, when they realized that there was this creepy MIB phenomenon, and government agencies said, well, if we want to silence UFO people, why don't we dress up as those guys that people call the Men in Black? And it would be good coverage, And that, admittedly, that would be a great way to hide, the truth, by dressing up as these, sort of almost mythological Men in Black, but when they're actually not mythological. So you've got that group where they're just sort of, jumping on the bandwagon, so to speak, and pretending to be the Men in Black to cover their tracks. But what we have to remember is that these stories were based on the original ones from the late 40s onward, when they were really strange. And most people actually do report the weirder types. The number of people who report seeing Men in Black that look just like us maybe makes up 10-15% of all of the reports, I would say. And I would say a good 85% people always talk about the stranger type. Now, to come back to your question, whether it's extraterrestrial or something spiritual or multidimensional, I honestly don't know. I mean, that's not me sort of avoiding the question or sitting on the fence. But what I do think, or what I know, is that the Men in Black that one of their primary goals seems to be terrorize people and frighten them. And sometimes it's as if that they do that deliberately. Now, most of the witnesses to the Men in Black come away, sort of like a shaking bowl of Jell-O, and again, like with the black-eyed children, I sometimes wonder if the threat and creating the terror, I sometimes wonder if that actually isn't a ruse. Maybe they're threatening the witnesses, not really to silence them, but to get them in a state of fear, and then they could sort of drain them of all those, sort of negative energies and adrenaline pumping around your body, and just, again, kind of like the black-eyed children, just draining of you, of your life force. And
or it could be radiation.
Yeah.
could be some sort of something, but yeah.
Yeah. But I think more than anything else, there's no doubt that the real Men in Black are very dangerous, supernatural things. They can perform, supernatural abilities. People have seen them sort of materialize and come through walls. I think one of the most disturbing aspects, is the mind control angle, and how that can affect people. But there's something that's, like all of these things, they all seem to hate us, or they've got a loathing of us. Why that should be, I don't know. But I mean, if you look at it as some people do from like a religious perspective, good and evil, a lot of these cases, there does seem to be this angle of just, all of these things, the Hatman, the shadow people, they all seem to target us for negative reasons, and very often for reasons that just, in many cases, destroy lives, because people went into this thinking it was going to be cool, fun, and exciting, and it turns out to be a total nightmare.
Well, yeah, it is. It definitely knocks you off your feet when stuff like this happens, and it is interesting to note that a lot of the MIB reports are centered, as you mentioned, around UFO sightings, and they seem to, come after a UFO sighting and try to maybe obtain information about that UFO sighting, or bully a witness into not talking about it.
Yeah, and that's sort of the classic goal, so to speak. But then, as I said, sometimes it's like they just want to do it for the fun of it.
How interesting. And I think that we just lost Nick, but we're going to, I will get back to him, but right now I am going to actually play, because we're getting ready for break. I have a very, very good friend, and I'm sure that you have heard of him. I mentioned him. His name is Matt Hepworth, and he was the first sound guy that I had in my band back in, oh my gosh, a long time ago, before the dinosaurs ruled the earth. And he has accompanied me all over the country to document some of the UFO investigations that I have done. And he's just a great help to me. And he's a musical genius. It's just amazing. He plays bass, keyboards, guitar. He sings, and he's a professional photographer and videographer and a sound engineer. But this is a kind of a creepy, cool tune that he did, and I'm going to play it. It's called Behind Every Tree in the haunted forest. And so I think that you guys will really dig this. He's playing with Ken Riddington and Tony Korologos, who's a legend here in the Utah, I almost said UFO scene, but in the Utah musical scene here. So I'm going to play this, and we'll get Nick back. So sit back and enjoy this creepy music by my friend Matt. back to UFO Classified. I am Erica Lukes here with my friend and colleague Nick Redfern, and I've decided for the next 2 weeks that I'm doing a show, spooky shows on the paranormal and some of the things that I've always been fascinated in, and I love it. This is my favorite time of year, and I wish that we were having Halloween under a little different circumstances, but let's enjoy it, and let's, maybe spend the rest of the evening watching creepy movies and getting your I don't know, creep on like I like to do. And I want to just play a little bit before we bring Nick back on. I was camping last week up near Skinwalker Ranch, and I was with Alice Druffel and her boyfriend Carlos. And so I just want to play you a little bit of what happened, and I promise I'll pay for your therapy after this, but check this out.
Good chicken breast, yeah. The best.
Oh my God. Oh God. Okay, well that was so anticlimactic.
Why are you trying to
You know who would do that? Carolyn would do that.
Oh, that's
Carolyn
cool.
would do that.
Well, I
I
mean,
never wanted to do more. I'm surprised you made it this far without tripping in that thing. That's concealed.
Okay, so that is me being a complete goober. And I know that this is shocking. I mean, Nick, you know me. You know how big of a goober I really am. And so I had this perfect wolf mask. And so they were sitting around a campfire, and I decided that and like Carlos was saying, I can't believe I actually could stay upright and then not bump into something. And then you hear the man scream. Because, of course, I wish I had one of those blood-curdling Jamie Lee Curtis screams, but no, you get the man scream, which is, a little questionable. And then the snort, which I like to do sometimes when I'm laughing so hard. But it was really fun to just watch their faces. And so thank you for sharing that. And next time you come to Utah, I'll take you camping and do the same thing to you. And so, Nick, you were, you've talked about coming to town a few times and letting me take you camping. I'm sure you're probably rethinking that.
Oh, well, I wouldn't rethink it because of the fear factor. I mean, that don't bother me. I mean, I'm quite gung-ho, when it's in the investigations. It's just I don't like sort of camping, and there's flies and there's no air conditioning. That's actually what I'm against.
Oh,
Camping.
really?
Yeah, it's not like, oh my God, it's we don't want to be around here. No, I mean, I'd love to go out, right out to the, the Skinwalker Ranch and spend a night there. That'd be very cool. But I'm one of these who likes.
I've got your number.
I want hot water and cold air.
You're a diva. Diva.
Some music in the background and
Diva Redfern. Mm-hmm.
Some intense hardcore punk in the background, and rather than sort of getting bitten by this and bitten by that,
There's something empowering about not bathing for 5 days. Come on now.
I believe you.
Whatever. No, you don't. That's okay. I don't know. I love camping, and Utah is such a great place to do that. And then you get up in a place, in it by the ranch and things, and your mind can just go off on little tangents. But especially when I'm hiding in the dark with my wolf mask.
But joking aside, I mean, I do like to go on expeditions because I think if you're going to find the answers to these phenomena, you do have to go looking for them. I mean, for example, I've been on about 7 or 8 expeditions now to Puerto Rico looking for the original Chupacabra when the reports surfaced in 1995. And and if you really want to go looking for these things, and which we should do, I mean, you really do have to go, through the rainforest, the jungles, and but that's what you have to do. I'm only joking when I'm talking about air conditioning and so on. But yeah, if you're going to look for these things, you really have to make it a road trip and go looking for these things, because that's the only way. I mean, it's kind of like with Loch Ness. the only way you're going to see these things, unless you're really lucky, of course, is to spend significant amount of time there, and try and solve the mystery. So yeah, road trips, and hitting the road and going to the sites and locations, that's all vital, really, if you're going to find answers.
And it's so much fun. I mean, I look back at some of the things that I've done, and even when you and I, were in Texas, and I was, I think, filming a TV show, and then you took me to that great location to where, and describe a little bit to the audience of where you took me, because it was pretty interesting.
Oh, you're talking about Aurora?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that was about a year ago. No, it was more than that now, wasn't it?
Yeah.
About 15, 16 months, was it? Something like that?
I think it was.
Yeah, I thought it was, yeah. Well, yeah, Erica was in Texas, and I said, well, why don't you come up for a couple of days? And I drove her over to the Aurora Cemetery, which is west of Dallas. I live just on the outsides of Dallas, and if you go west, towards the west, you find this little town called Aurora. And it has an ancient, I wouldn't say an ancient legend, but it's an old legend that goes back to the latter part of the 1800s, when reportedly a UFO crashed on the one side of the hill on this little town of Aurora. And on the other side of the road is this old cemetery, which has been there, I think, for about 200 years, something along those lines. And it's sort of a cool place to go and see, because it's sort of like I guess you could call it like a proto-Roswell case. Roswell was 47. The alleged UFO crash at Aurora was 1897, so it's a long, long time ago. And over the years, various researchers have looked into the case, and certainly the most prominent and extensive one would have been the late Jim Mars. He wrote about it and actually lived only about 10 minutes drive from the crash itself, which is kind of strange, strange coincidence. And so I took Erica out there, and we had a good time sort of taking pictures, and I sort of told her the story of the legend, and we got pictures and things like that. And it's sort of cool to go out there and say you've been, and there's like a historic marker there as well that the city of Fort Worth have put up out there. And to say you've been to the location and checked it all out, got pictures, and not everybody has the opportunity to do that. So it was good. It was good timing, and and this little town, middle of nowhere, sitting on one of the most famous UFO stories of the last century, really.
Yeah, that was really fun. I mean, you're right. It's so important to have those adventures and just go out and talk to people in the area and get an idea. It was interesting because I've been up by Skinwalker Ranch and in that area a lot over the past month, and I've talked to several people who have shared some very interesting stories with me about the goings-ons in that area, and so I look forward to sharing their stories. Yeah, if they, at some point decide they want to step forward. But it is always very interesting just to get a place and try to take it all in, learn the history, find people in the community that are willing to share things with you. And it's just, even if you don't find anything tangible, which more often than not we really don't in this subject, you have an incredible time, and it broadens your horizons.
Yeah, you're right. And I think, you made a good point there. I mean, these things, these investigations, like whether it's the Skinwalker Ranch or, me sort of crawling around caves in Puerto Rico, as well as the investigations, it's fun as well. It's fun and it's exciting, and and I think that sort of creates like a great impetus and enthusiasm to go out on these investigations and road trips. And there's some hazards that you can never sort of foresee. I remember, for example, the very first time I went to Puerto Rico, this was with the Sci-Fi Channel for a show called what was it called? Anyway, it was for the Sci-Fi Channel, and we did some filming in this one particular large cave, and I felt something hit me on the head, and it was actually a bat had peed on me. But it was like it was like the ceiling of the cave was like shaking, but it was actually just thousands, I guess, of bats. And one of the crew, one of the guys said, "Oh, you need to go, and get rabies shots and whatever." But,
did you?
But I didn't.
Well, that explains everything.
Well, what I did, I'd got a small towel in one of my bags, and it splattered on me, and I just got the towel straight out, and I just wiped it straight off. So it wasn't like anything got in my mouth or eye, or anything like that.
Well, next time I see you, you're wearing a freaking hazmat suit, buddy.
This kind of sounds like a zombie movie. I was about to transform because I've got infected. You know what I mean?
It's all coming together for me now, Nick.
Yeah, that explains all the weirdness. Yeah.
I think it does. Yes, it's.
But yeah, I mean that's one of the things that does happen. On a creepy day, in an old huge cave, and you go walking in with the crew, and then something just whack on the side of your head, and it was a glob of pee.
Oh my God.
And I was like, oh my God. But luckily, as I said, I mean, it could have been dangerous, I guess, if it had if I was looking up and it straight into your mouth.
Well, I know, with your mouth open, I can picture that.
It'd be like Ozzy when he had to have that done, when he had to have shots for biting the head off a bat. And
well, I'm not sure those shots really worked out for him in the end, but...
Yeah. So, when you're going on road trips, you got to be prepared for the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Oh yeah, I could tell stories about my adventures in Norway, but I won't bother anybody with that. We'll have to do that on another date. But it is a lot of fun, and it's mysterious, and I love going to. I mean, I would love to come down and go to the Big Thicket, because that place has always intrigued me. And again, we've talked about that on different radio shows, but talk a little bit, tell everybody, because I've got lots of new people here, tell people about the Big Thicket and some of the different types of sightings that have taken place there.
Yeah, sure. Well, as I mentioned, I live just outside of the fringes of Dallas. I'm about sort of 25-minute drive from where President Kennedy was shot. That's sort of where I'm located. And if you go east, you come to this. Well, a lot of people don't realize, I've found, even some Americans don't realize actually how heavily wooded and forested it is when you go east out of Dallas. When I first moved over here about 22, 23 years ago, I thought it really was going to be like all desert and cactus, and I was amazed that there were these, forests and woodland. But, when you leave the east side of Dallas and you're sort of heading towards Louisiana, it's heavily forested for a couple of hours driving all the way. It's massively forested. And there's this one huge area of woodland called the Big Thicket. Now, the Big Thicket has been there, well, as long as the trees have been there, and before them, I suppose. But it has a long history, and it has a road that goes through it called Bragg Road. And Bragg Road, locally, is known as Ghost Light Road, or other people just call it Ghost Road. But it's basically like a haunted road, but it's not haunted by sort of wailing people and things like that. Essentially, these strange balls of light, that's why some people call it Ghost Light Road, because on just any time you can go there, and good chances you're going to see one of these balls of light. And typically, they're anywhere from the size of about a golf ball to like a baseball. But some people have said they've seen balls of light bigger than like a soccer ball. And in one or two occasions, of cases, I should say, that I've got, there are some reports where these balls of light are about the size of like a beach ball, so some are getting pretty big. And what's interesting about these balls of light is that they seem to present, if you like, some degree of intelligence. When people, for example, have gone towards them, they've sort of moved back. And then if you walk away from them, they'll slowly come towards you. Almost it's like an intelligent energy. But what's even weirder is that also in the Big Thicket, over the course of about 40 or 50 years, there have been regular reports of what you would call Bigfoot creatures. And before that, and into the 19th century, people referred to them as wild men. But they were basically the same thing. It was just, a different time era. And so when you read these old stories of wild men in the area and in different parts of the US, and then you read about Bigfoot today, they're actually talking about the same thing but with a different name. Now, a friend of mine, Rob Riggs, who unfortunately died a couple of years ago, Rob lived in the area for most of his life, and I think he was probably in his 70s, I think, when he died. But he wrote a really good book called In the Big Thicket, and he did a post book to that one as well. And the more Rob looked into it, he came to believe that the Bigfoot creatures were not just a North American ape that science and zoology hadn't found yet. He felt there was something far weirder about Bigfoot than it just being an ape. And he collected a number of reports from the Big Thicket where the Bigfoot creatures were seen at the same location and the same time as the strange balls of light. And there are even some cases where the Bigfoot creatures were covered, like sprinkled in these smaller balls of light, kind of like a Christmas tree. You've got the Christmas tree and you've got all the little lights all flittering. That's what the best way I can describe it. They were almost sort of, not on fire, but, they were just glistening and glowing with these little lights. And when Rob got so many of these stories, he realized that there was something bigger or weirder going on. But, to go to this hugely wooded area, where you've got Bigfoot, you've got the ghost lights, other people claim to have seen these large so-called Black Panther type animals, but there's some weird cases about them as well, where they've kind of just vanished, in the blink of an eye as well. And I know just one or two cases of sort of large winged creatures, where one of them described kind of similar to like a classic pterodactyl. So there's a lot of weirdness, and in many respects, I would call the Big Thicket kind of a parallel to, the Skinwalker Ranch, sort of like a hotspot, like a paranormal hotspot.
Yeah, I probably would have too, but but now I know better, and I'm not sure. There's definitely something going on, and for me, I feel, the paranormal. There is something real that is worthy of study, and people have had life-changing experiences. But then you look at a place like Skinwalker, which is just truly the Hollywood manufactured myth of all these things, and a psyop in that area. And I definitely, my opinions, as because we talk quite frequently, and you've listened to me as my thought process has changed on things, but I definitely, like when you look at Norway and you look at the Yakima, Washington area, and they've got the same types of things taking place that they do in the Big Thicket, it really is curious, and I would just love to go down there. I want to go down there and visit that, and I also want to go to Marfa.
Oh, well, yeah, Marfa's another perfect example. Those are the sort of two famous ones in Texas, and I would say the Marfa lights are more well-known than, the Big Thicket. However, the Big Thicket has, a greater number of other issues going on as well. At Martha, it's mainly the lights. The Big Thicket, you've got all sorts. And, so the whole area is really strange. And when you get off the main road onto Bragg Road, and then you start walking into the depths of it, I mean, you can easily get lost. And you wouldn't think you would, but you would. It's just so dense and so big, and no other really surrounding roads, etc. So you have to be a bit careful, but that's what you got to do, though. So.
Well, and it just sounds fascinating. There's so many cool places, all over the world that have these types of, you hear these types of stories, and it's just it is a grand adventure. And one of these days, I'm just going to get in my car and drive across the country in my hazmat suit, apparently, and then try to go visit some of these places and just make and just document some of the people and their stories and in history. And it's all so cool. It's such a fun learning process. Even if nothing, drops out of the sky and the mothership, doesn't land in front of me, it's a fun process.
Well, yeah, and one of the good things about the Bragg Road is that, all the locals know the story, and, if you roll into town, and that's one of the best ways to, to investigate something, is to roll into town and go into the usual places where you can always get a lot of data. That's like the gas stations, the local stores, the local bar, and that's what I do, I just go in and say, hey, I'm looking into this, and every time I've been, everybody's been very friendly and hospitable, and said, oh yeah, you want to go and see Bob who works at the gas station, he saw it, that kind of thing, and it's always been very sort of, as I said, very friendly, and people just happy to help and direct you down there, and the local people in the little towns and so on, it's a great way to sort of open the story, and also, to actually know where to go, because otherwise, I mean, you possibly wouldn't know where to go. But I don't think I've had an experience where nobody said, get lost kind of thing, just go. It's always been, oh yeah, we know about that.
Well, it is interesting, again, to get back to the skinwalker thing. I think people in that area are so sick of talking about it because it's been so commercialized that you don't get a lot of, luckily for me, I know the right people and have built trust over many, many years, but it's sometimes it can be, people just will kind of shut down. And I also noticed that out by Dugway, where you've had lots of reports of UFO sightings, even though it is a top secret, military installation that is testing technology and things. But, you get people that don't want to talk a lot about things like that as well. So it is interesting just to see reactions and things. But I want to change the subject because you've got a Peter in chat, who always has great questions, wants to know what your thoughts are on cattle mutilations.
Well, again, I think we could be looking at a couple of different things. Now, when you talk about cattle mutilations themselves, I mean, the whole classic phenomenon kind of kicked off, in the late 1960s, and I don't think anyone would sort of, disagree with me if I said it all really reached its height, if you like, in the 1970s, and then it's sort of, it's cancelled, continued since then, and I wouldn't say it's gone now, but I mean, there's certainly not as many reports as there was. But, there's no doubt the 70s was that sort of era. Now, if you look at the collective body of material from that period, I mean, we're clearly not talking about, attacks from animals. You're talking about organs being removed very, very carefully, and not in the fashion that a wild animal like a mountain lion or a coyote, that kind of thing. We're not talking about anything like that. And, very often it was the same organs, skin was removed, again in sort of very careful fashion as well. And black helicopters flying around, that kind of thing. Elevated radiation readings in the areas, strange tripod landing markings on the grounds near where the mutilations occurred. And actually, if you go to the FBI's official website, which is the Vault, and it's vault.gov, and there's a section called Unexplained Mysteries, and within that section, there's the FBI have declassified all of their cattle mutilation files, and they talk about all those, the black helicopters, the radiation, the tripods, organs removed, and it's a fascinating dossier from the 70s and into the early 80s. And but for me, I don't think cattle mutilations, or this aspect of cattle mutilations, I don't think this is connected to UFOs. That might disappoint some people, but for me, it does. And I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. A lot of the 1970s era cattle mutilations occurred in northern New Mexico. Many of them are in and around the town of Dulce, which has a long lasting history of UFO activity, and even controversial claims of like a so-called underground alien base in the area. Now, what's intriguing is at the same time that the cattle mutilations were going on in that area, there were a lot of experimentation going on in the area, military experimentation. And one of the intriguing theories is that something possibly could have got out, from the environment. I mean, I grew up until my 20s, in the UK, and I can still well remember when mad cow broke out, and there were people, being infected, and kids like 10 or 15 developing like equivalents to dementia because it was just attacking the brain, and and then it wasn't just people, it was the cattle herd as well, and the entire UK cattle herd, was destroyed. It was like Armageddon kind of thing. People were wondering who next. And on top of that, you've got the food chain just spreading and spreading. And of course, people were panicking. Well, when did this begin? How many of us are infected? And my personal view is that at some point something happened, some kind of experiment, and there was a fear that it had got into the U.S. food chain and possibly starting or in and around northern New Mexico. And so I think there was a study, a top secret study of something to try and figure out what was going on and had it sort of spread. And I think that's the most likely scenario for these helicopters, the radiation, organs removed, precisely because they would want to study them to see what condition they're in. But in saying that, there is this other angle as well where, like, for example, a Skinwalker Ranch, other places where, again, you have these hotspots, you do find, animals found dead. Puerto Rico, again, one of the reasons why we did the filming out there in 2004 was because so many animals were found dead with blood removed from the bodies. But in these cases, when we're looking for the chupacabra, they were, what you could see were clearly sort of puncture wounds on the neck. It was almost like a classic vampire type situation. And now I cannot put the blame on that, on government experiments, because I don't think there was a connection. But, you've got a similar situation where the chupacabra allegedly, sort of drained the local farm animals of blood. So there's a similarity, but it's clearly a different type of mutilation. So again, I think, like with the Men in Black angle, we're talking about two different types of mutilations with completely different angles to them.
Well, and it is interesting because when you look at the cattle mutilations and how they started, they were really at their pinnacle in 1973 was when all the cases really were highlighted. And you look at Skinwalker Ranch, and then you look at Dr. Colm Kelleher, who wrote a book called Brain Trust, and he was working for the CDC specifically on mad cow disease and different things like that. So to me, the human aspect, which has been verified by other people that worked for Bass and for Bigelow, I mean, that it was a human thing. That makes a lot of sense that they would be testing or taking an animal's tissue to study it.
Well, I agree, totally agree with that. There is one thing I would add to that, is that I wouldn't be surprised if some of the stories about UFOs and cattle mutilations, I wouldn't be at all surprised if some of those stories weren't deliberately seeded out there to make people think it was aliens, and it would veer the investigations away from the true story, and it'd have everybody get exciting chasing aliens. I think that's probably what happened, that there was a cover story of aliens to hide some kind of operation that had gone wrong, and there was a great fear on somebody's part that something was going to get into the food.
And I think you hit it right on the head. I mean, I really think, between, that statement on the cattle mutilations, that this was kind of seeded into to our, the population, and the cattle mutilations and the aliens. I mean, it just gives that sort of oh my gosh, I'm totally blanking on the word plausible deniability. I mean, it's like, okay, you've got, this alien creature that's coming down and taking these animals and cutting them with razor-like precision. I mean, when I look back at the narrative, and specifically the people who were on a payroll who were promoting that narrative, I definitely suspect that is the case, and you hit it on the head. And I also want to just throw out there that the last time you were on my show, you were talking about the research that you did over at Rendlesham on the Rendlesham Forest case, and you brought up the thought that you felt that was also something that was man-made, and the UFO was perhaps a cover story. And I really appreciate that about your work. I think that's important to note that you take a serious look at stuff like that.
Sorry, say that again. I interrupted.
Oh no, I was just going to say, I think that's a good thing that you take a serious look at some of the more, it's not as glamorous, but the unfortunate side of all of this, where there is something that is man-made, and the topic, the paranormal or UFO topic, is used as a cover story to hide covert projects.
Yeah, and Rendlesham Forest is an interesting one. It's sort of been termed the British Roswell, but that makes people think that something crashed in Rendlesham Forest, which is on the east coast of England. But there was nothing actually crashed. Even the witnesses said they saw something sort of hovering or moving around in the woods. Now, Rendlesham Forest is a very old, ancient forest, east coast of England, very sort of old area. Nothing's changed for a few hundred years. It kind of looks like, literally like 200 years old. And in December 1980, there were these strange lights, late one night, December 1980, strange lights in the sky, what seemed like beams of light, like laser beam lights coming down to the sky, from the sky, I should say. And there was two local military bases, both of which are closed down now. One called Royal Air Force Bentwaters, and the other one called Royal Air Force Woodbridge. And when the Cold War ended, the British government sort of bit by bit closed the bases down. But they're still there in part, but they just sort of leased, the buildings are now sort of leased out to anybody who wants to use it. And reportedly, there were 3 nights of activity with multiple U.S. military personnel who were working at the base. And this was like a group of U.S. personnel had been assigned to the base, even though it was in the UK. And they reported seeing these lights, strange thing in the sky, things going through the woods. And as I said, went on for 3 nights. And Nobody knew what was going on. Now, the more and more I looked into it, because when this happened, I mean, I was just a kid. I was still at school when the Rendlesham thing went ahead. But when the story broke, it was a major story in the UK. And like a lot of people in ufology, I thought, wow, aliens have landed at Rendlesham Forest. However, the more I started to dig into it, the more I began to wonder if it really was a UFO event at all. And I was able to speak to a number of people who had significant data on this case, and who said that it actually was not a UFO event, but what it was a sophisticated, top-secret experiment using holograms, and the purpose was to essentially see the extent to which the human mind could be scrambled, and you could see something that was actually not really there via these, highly created holograms. And the purpose of all this would be to see not only could the human mind be meddled with, but could you actually cause a person to see something that was actually not really there. And if you kind of manage a program like that, imagine what you could actually do on the battlefield against the enemy. You could present, in some ways at least, possibly project, highly sophisticated holograms at the enemy and have them in a complete state of terror. And people have said to me, well, we all think you say, aliens, and you're wrong, Nick. When I wrote a book on this in May of this year called The Rendlesham Forest UFO Conspiracy, and when that came out, for about the first 6 weeks after, I was like the next worst thing to Saddam Hussein. It was like, how you dare you say this, Nick? About this case. Why would you say this? And then, of course, you had the inevitable, really conspiracy theorists who were saying, oh, well, Nick must be being paid by the Illuminati or somebody,
Yeah, get on your QAnon bandwagon there, buddy. And
exactly.
That was interesting, and that was hard because I remember, when that book came out, I mean, that was, to me, I think that's one of the most important books that you've written, because it is so... You were so right on about that, and it was interesting to see the true believers who kind of come out and I mean, it's like it's funny to me that people are more willing to believe the alien extraterrestrial thing than they are to look at history, to look at facts, to look at declassified documents, and to see what our government does, to military, to soldiers and civilians and different things. It's like, why is it easier to believe in aliens than to believe in the facts?
Well, I can tell you why, because aliens are exciting. And holograms aren't particularly exciting unless you're a science geek,
Especially those tall Nordics, I admit, that is.
But yeah, I mean, if you think about it, if you're in the woods or on the battlefield, you've got extremely sophisticated holographic technology, and the enemy's coming towards you, and you can project, say, images of hundreds of demons coming towards you, but they're not real, they're not there, and that's the story that I was given by a number of people, was that they deliberately tested these holograms by essentially, with like a dangling carrot scenario, luring the guys at the dead of night into the woods, and then let the program run and see how they react when they see images, holographic images of UFOs flitting through the woods, and taking careful note of how the guys responded. Did they go into like a complete state of panic? Did they just stand there with their mouths hanging out? Or did they, were they tempted to shoot? You can actually learn a lot from that kind of situation as to how military would respond in an extremely alternative situation. So I wrote the book, and then there was the situation of, oh, Nick, what are you talking about, all this? But the way I look at it, I've got thick skin, and people want to argue with me, I'll slam back at them. And, I'm quite happy to, get in a big debate, and that happened a lot, and it reached sort of fiery tones, and but that's good for radio, it's good for the host, it's good for the listeners, and it's good for me. I enjoy that kind of confrontation.
I never would have guessed. But I mean, who were the biggest, as far as the people that were actually involved in that case? I mean, were there people that attacked you that were involved in that case, and what was their thought process on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, some of the guys who were involved, that they were critical of me, and I have to admit, I could understand, that they would do that because they were the guys who were there, and I wasn't. But I think I made a strong enough case to demonstrate. Now, whether people buy into it or not, but I think I made enough material to demonstrate that this was a series of holographs, and it was a top-secret experiment to play with the minds of the guys. But I get it, they don't want to, take that angle as, the answer, and because what they saw to them was so graphically real. Now, one of the things a lot of people don't know about Rendlesham Forest, and this is actually one of the most important parts of the story, is that Rendlesham Forest has actually had a long-standing history of top-secret military experiments in the area. Now, to give you a quick example, in the early 1930s, the British government set up a committee called the Tizard Committee, and it was one of the first radar-driven programs in the 1930s. Hitler was going to be the next major enemy, the Nazis, and so we needed something like radar, to be able to tell when the enemy aircraft are coming in. So the Tizard Committee was one of the first radar programs. There was another one about 2 decades later called Cobra Mist, another highly classified program. There was also, in the Second World War, a very strange story of a little village where a group of Nazis tried to invade from the East Coast late one night, and they were all killed by some sort of technology that set them all on fire. And the reason I mention all of these, because this experiment using some sort of fiery, flaming device to kill all these German soldiers, the 2 radar programs and several others all existed within less than 8 miles from Rendlesham Forest. Now, most people don't know the sheer number of all those highly classified experiments that went on just outside on the fringes of Rendlesham Forest. And then in 1980, we have another one. So my view is the very fact that the British government ran numerous experiments on the fringes of Rendlesham Forest from the 1930s onward, then it makes a great deal of sense to suggest that Rendlesham, the UFO event, was yet another secret experiment held in that area. And the reason why it was held in that area was because you had 2 military bases, which if anything went wrong, you'd have all the guys there ready to respond. You got a forest itself, where you could hide a lot of things like this and perform such an experiment. And it's a very isolated area as well. You're right near the coastline. So put all that together, and I think, again, a strong case that this was an experiment can be made. But again, the UFO subject is so emotion-driven that, like I said, people don't want to hear about top-secret experiments. They want to hear about aliens, but too bad. I mean, if I don't think it's aliens, I've got to tell people what I think it is and why. And if they don't like it, well, that's just too bad,
Well, and I think I commend you for that, and it has been shocking to me to see with the revelations that we've made about Skinwalker Ranch and things that, of course you've got people that just, go pout in the corner and things because they've had these beliefs in place for so long, and you just think, okay, wait a minute. I mean, just like with Rendlesham, I mean, there are people that are being hurt, and their lifespan could be shortened as a result of some of this top secret testing without consent. And so, to me, at some point in time, you have to be a moral and decent human being and get over the need that you're going to live and die on the UFO hill. You know what I mean?
Oh, I know exactly what you mean. Yeah, it's sort of. I think the reason why all this gets so complicated is because there's no doubt in my mind that there's a genuine UFO phenomenon. Now, whether it's extraterrestrial, multidimensional, interdimensional, time travelers, I don't know what they are, but I do believe in a genuine, unknown, unidentified UFO phenomenon. But, and it is a big but, I think there's also a case where, over the decades, government agencies have hijacked and used the real phenomenon as a means to hide their own classified programs and experiments behind it. And so if anybody comes looking, they can spread stories of, oh, it's just little green men, So I think that's why it gets so complicated, because there's a real phenomenon and there's the hijacked phenomenon that we are using the same technology to work on our experiments. And I think people realize that there was these two angles to it: the real mystery, the genuine phenomenon, and then it becomes difficult. But then you've got to extract the real from the fabricated, and that's where you have to have your mind wide open, rather than just being, a UFO believer, so to speak. You've got to have an open mind, not a prepared mind.
Right, and that's the thing. It's like, I think we both feel the same way. It's like with our research. I mean, I'm going wherever it takes me, and I'm not going to. I've gone from point, A of being a starry-eyed, quote unquote, believer, and things which I still, like you, understand there is something very real and very important, but I've also learned all of the games at hand and the fragile egos and the intelligence community inserting themselves and pushing people off course. All you have to do is look at the Paul Benowitz case and some of the really despicable things that have been done in the name of secrecy, and you just, that should sum it up for you. But I think it's important that people who take a genuine interest, who have seen profound things, that they realize getting involved in the UFO community can be hazardous to your mental health.
Well, that's one of the reasons why I always tell people to, balance things. I mean, for me, I like to do my writing and research and investigations, sort of like 9 to 5. I like to do it that way. That's, I have got, some friends who do it through the night. They like to work through the night. I like to sort of, like I said, 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, and then I switch off and I, have a regular life, and or as regular as it is, but and I think that's important, because for whatever reason, you can get sort of sucked in and obsessed with the subject, and there's nothing wrong with, having a great fascination for things, but sometimes, and no disrespect, but, sometimes a fascination can spill over into an obsession, and that can be dangerous. Obsessions can be dangerous in any form of life,
Well, that's true. I absolutely agree, and that's, I just am very grateful for you to elaborate on that and to get information out, and I'm glad you're one of those people that you're just like, yeah, whatever, bring it on.
Yeah, I mean, if somebody wants to debate me, wants to have an argument, that's fine. I don't care. That's what that's what we should be doing. Is debating things, and and looking for answers. Sometimes I think, there's a reluctance to go down these paths like, Rendlesham being an experiment because, some of the figures in ufology don't want to hear that because they worry they're not going to bring people in, asses on seats on conferences. They don't want to hear that. Don't invite Nick. I've heard this before. Don't invite Nick because he's going to go. People are going to listen to stuff that we don't want to hear. That's happened several times, and I mean, it's like, well, whatever. If people can't take listening to an alternative theory, it's too bad.
And that is so crazy, and it's like you just. Yeah. I mean. It's shouldn't that be if you really genuinely care about studying this and learning about it, then why wouldn't you want to have somebody that might challenge your opinion and throw new ideas out there? Isn't that part of an important discovery process? And it's like, I would just, like you do, just look at the people and just think I wouldn't want to speak at your freaking conference or be involved with you anyway, because it's like if you're going to be that, if you're that, I don't know what, you've been taking the kooky train to, Looney Town, I guess. I mean, yeah, it kind of frightens me.
Well, I think the most important thing to do is to recognize, as I said, there's two types of phenomena. There's us and the original genuine unknown phenomena. The two have sort of melded together and they've been used for experiments and probably vice versa as well. And that I think is in simple terms, that is the answer. Now what they are, I wrote a book, Erica mentioned earlier, Final Events, which is about this group in government that talked about but they believe that the phenomenon is demonic. Now, I don't like using that term because it creates up a certain image, like, sort of horns and forked tails and fiery pits and all this business.
Looks like me when I go to bed. Sounds like me.
And, and for me, somebody's demon could be somebody else's, interdimensional creature, and it might be somebody else's time traveler. I think everybody kind of takes a view or a theory as to what these things are. But when you're specifically saying, oh, they're demons, it does create an image that is solely religious-driven, and the kind of images that you all see on horror movies of what demons look like, So I try and steer away from, certain words and imagery because, inevitably it can cause problems and pushes people down different avenues. What I think the best thing to do is just keep following the data, the evidence, and just go where it goes. And if it goes where you thought it was going to go, well, you can high-hand yourself. If, however, it goes somewhere else, well, that really is too bad and you were deceived or you just went down the wrong path. I mean, that's happened to me. I don't think there's anybody in ufology who hasn't been deceived or hoaxed by someone at least once.
Well, but how many people in ufology would actually admit that?
Well, that's true, but I mean, it does happen. It's happened to me, I've spoken to people who've told a really good story, and then 6 weeks down the line, it's collapsed. But the worst thing you can do is hide it, or still believe, try and still champion it. No, you should just say, well, this guy did turn out to be just a fantasist, and it started great, and it didn't end good, People should, have the guts to at least say, this is a weird subject, and we're in sort of like, hazy ground on all of this stuff, and we just got to see where it goes, and whatever the answer is, that's what it is. And I think that's the same with Rendlesham. I honestly do think if the truth comes out, that it will be shown to have been a top-secret experiment, and if it does, then it will impact on ufology in many ways. One, that we were duped. Number two, we were successfully duped. And number three, it shows how the real phenomenon can be used, as I said, for military purposes. And that is the bigger story that people, I think, need to understand to realize that the full panoramic story of it all.
Absolutely. It is perfect. You just summed it up perfectly. That is exactly what we need to be aware of. And I believe, when you look at some of the, Rendlesham, you look at Area 51, you look at some of the famous things that have taken hold in ufology especially over the past 2 decades. You see the same con artists basically that are involved in creating that narrative, and those to me are pulling us so off course, because there is something real that deserves to be looked at. And when you're spending time looking at reverse engineering at Area 51, which is a total crock in my opinion, then you're taking away from getting out there where there might be something genuine and looking at that. And the same thing with Skinwalker Ranch and things. And so it really behooves people not to fall down the rabbit hole of ufology and to start obsessing so much about some of the things that the same people involved in the military intelligence have promoted. Why would they be doing that? Why would they be supporting, a new organization? And all of these things. I mean, we've got to be smarter than we have been. And luckily for me, I have such a great group of people that listen to my show, and your followers as well, people that read your work. I mean, it's like people do have the intelligence to start seeing through some of this stuff. And I'm sure that must be a little frightening for the puppet masters.
You were asking me then? Or
I don't know. That was just a long and windy statement, and I was just waiting for a pregnant pause from you, and,
Well, you got one. But no, you're right. I would agree on everything you said then, and particularly like Area 51, it's become like a legend. It's kind of like Loch Ness. It's like this mystical, magical place. And again, I think a lot of weird stuff coming out of Area 51 is probably next generation aircraft that we don't know about. And if something's seen by mistake, well, they put out the rumors. Oh, yeah, it was, little green men again, and just, it becomes a joke. And but it's often that aspect that people, overlook, and when really that is one of the most important, sort of aspects of the story.
Absolutely. And I love that. This has been one of those shows where we've talked about everything under the under the sun, and I love that. And I think you've really ended it on a good note. But I want to, just for the next couple minutes, and I'm sorry that you've only got a couple minutes to tell us about your new book, but just give us a little primer and then tell us where we can find your latest.
All right, well, thanks. Well, the new book, which has literally just come out a couple of weeks ago, is called The Martians, and it's a study of all the various anomalies that over the decades have been captured on film on the surface of Mars, which look like not just the face on Mars, which everybody's heard of, but a lot of really weird, strange anomalies. And it's roughly about a 300-page long book on the history of Mars. And what I believe was absolutely 100% believe that there was some sort of ancient Mars civilization long time ago, probably hundreds of thousands of years, or maybe possibly 10,000 years ago. We don't really know, but it's a study of a world that at some point in its past was demolished essentially, but there are aspects left. So that's the new book, The Martians, which has just been published.
You know what? I love it, and I will look forward to reading that. And I still need to get a copy of the Rendlesham book, because to me this is just, you've hit home in a big way. So I thank you so much for coming on the show, and thank you for making me laugh and just having a good time with for all of us, because we need that, and we need also to be to understand that there's some things that are pretty serious that we need to look at when we're navigating through the murky waters and all of that stuff. But Nick, thank you so much. I appreciate you. And I wanted to tell all of my listeners, thank you for being here every week. And to all of you who support the show, you mean the world to me. Thank you for helping me stay on the air. I really, truly feel that I am working my hardest. I know I'm working my tail off to get to the truth about things, which is very difficult to do, but this is a show that is dedicated to all of us, and we deserve respect, and we deserve the truth, and we will find it together. And I want to also thank Mario for always being my right-hand man and my biggest supporter, and somebody who was there to help get the word out. So thanks all of you so much. Please stay safe. COVID numbers are going through the roof here in Utah, and it's going to be a really, really interesting fall and winter. So please stay safe, my friends, and make sure you share UFO Classified, get the word out. And if you're listening to this and you're on Spreaker, go up to the top of the page and hit the like and follow buttons, please. I appreciate you. Take it easy, stay safe, and we will catch you next week with another little show about Halloween, and we might just go off like we did tonight. Who knows, but we'll have a good time. I'm Erica Lukes, and we'll catch you next week.
Thanks, Erica.
Thanks, Nick.
So my skeptical mind, and that's just who I am. My skeptical mind goes to, well, yeah, of course, you've got this guy over here that's logical and reasonable, and you got this guy over here that's wearing a tinfoil hat. Of course, the tinfoil hat guy's gonna see a lot of stuff, right? He's like imagining it, or he's